Hi guys, my name is Ahmed Malik and I am the squad lead for integration and analytics squad at Adasight. And today in this video, we are going to be talking about how we can connect Google BigQuery to Amplitude and import data from Google BigQuery to Amplitude. There are several use cases for this. The first one is that you have some other data for your users that you want to add to Amplitude to enrich the data that you have within Amplitude. So that's the first case. The second case is that you are migrating from another analytics tool, or you have some historical data for your users that you want to import into Amplitude. And using a data warehouse like Google BigQuery can be a very good way to import the historical data for your users within Amplitude. So the first thing that we are going to talk about is the structure of the data that you need to have within Google BigQuery before you set up your Google BigQuery connection with Amplitude. So, if we talk about the types of data that we can import, the first type is events. The second type of data is user properties, and then the third type of data is group properties. Now we're going to go through each of them one by one. And talk about the different details that we have, and then once we're done with this, we'll move on to the integration part. So if we are importing events, then it is very important to make sure that the table in BigQuery that you want to import is structured in the correct format. So the first thing that we need to know is that we need to have these columns in the table, and the column names should be in lowercase. And the best practice is to follow these exact labels that we have when we are setting up our columns within BigQuery. So the first column is user ID. This is mandatory unless we are using device ID. So the second column that you see is device ID. So we need to have at least one of these. The best practice is that if we have data for a user who is already identified or logged in or registered, then we use both user ID and device ID. If not, then we need to have at least one of these two. Another important thing to understand is that we need to make sure that the device ID or the user ID that we are using in the historical data is the same that we are currently using within Amplitude, because these are the keys that Amplitude is going to use to identify the user from BigQuery to Amplitude and then merge their data. If we have, let's say for example, on Amplitude we are using email IDs as a user ID, and in BigQuery it's a system generated alphanumeric ID. uh, then the data won't match, and Amplitude will create new users instead of attributing the events data to existing users. So this is very important, that whenever we are importing any data, we need to make sure that the user ID or the device ID matches with what we are already sending into Amplitude. The third column is basically event type. This essentially is the event name, and this is also a mandatory field, because if we don't have this, then we won't know what events we are passing through. And then we need to have the timestamp for on which this event was triggered. Then we need to have event properties. This is also a mandatory field. And then finally we have user properties, which is not um, a mandatory field. And then we have updated time column. This is also not a mandatory field. So we need to have these fields ready, and then the table should be in this format before we set up our import if you're talking about events. Now let's move on to user properties and group properties. So for user properties, we need to again have the user ID, because again user properties are associated with a specific user. And if we are updating a user property for a specific user, we need to identify who that user is, and then we need to have the specific user property that we want to create or maybe update. Examples of user properties, as you can see over here, it could be a city, it could be gender, it could be anything else related to that user. Maybe we want to you have different license levels, and you want to identify on which license level a user currently is. Maybe the user is a trial user, if there is a paid user, what tier they are on. These are all the things that you can identify within user properties. And then similarly, we have group properties. So group properties are primarily used when you are identifying a specific group of users. So for example, if you are running a SaaS business, which um, which is a B2B SaaS, then you want to identify different users who belong to a specific company, or for example, different users who belong to a specific role function. So over here, you can see that we have companies, and then we have an example of roles that we can have within groups, and then um, what is the group property that we want to associate with that specific group. So that could be a location, it could be again a license level. So these are the things that you can assign to each group property. So once we have all of these ready, then we can move on to the process of setting up the BigQuery data import function within Amplitude. So we've already talked about the tables. So this is the first step that we need to do. We need to set up the tables with the format that we just discussed. Once we're done with this, then we need to create a Google Cloud Storage bucket. um, this is basically something that Amplitude recommends, that you create one dedicated to Amplitude imports. If you already have created one which you are using for other purposes, it is recommended that you do not use that one. Amplitude recommends that you create a new one just for this purpose. And then you need to create a service account. This service account needs to have permission for the bucket and the tables, and you can see the details over here. So for BigQuery, we need these permissions, and for cloud storage, we need these permissions. And then based on your Amplitude account, it is also recommended that you whitelist these IPs. If you're using the Amplitude US hosting, then you need to whitelist these IPs in BigQuery. If you are using the European hosting, then you need to whitelist these IPs. So once you've done this, then you can go to the Amplitude interface, go to the data section, click on catalog, and in the sources tab, you can select BigQuery. Once you've done that, you can add the service account key and specify your Google Cloud Storage bucket name. And then once that is done, you can click on next. Once you click on next, this is where you select what type of data you are going to be ingesting into Amplitude, whether it is going to be event data or user property data or group property data. And if it is going to be a full sync, or is it going to be a time-based sync. So full sync is basically if you want to do a one-time historical update, then you need to do full sync. If you want to do a time-based sync, then you can select the time specific time that you want to update the data for, and then you can select the frequency. So if you know that this is something that if this data is being collected from somewhere else and it will get updated, then you can go for a time-based approach, and you can select the frequency of how frequent you want this data to ingest. Um, then you can test your SQL, and once the you see that there are no errors, you can click on finish, and then you will get a notification. So yeah, this was a very quick overview of how you can set up a BigQuery import within Amplitude. So this was the topic for today's video, and see you guys in other videos.